So let's get going here. All right. So how would you define America? Everything we're experiencing in our country right now boils down to being the result of how America is defined, right? More accurately, the worldview or view of reality that interprets America. It is amazing that America is doing as well as it is because Americans are really, really bad philosophers. Most do not think philosophy is important at all, right? And from what I've learned the past 12 years, I'm really incredulous that America is doing as well as it is. I'm going to share what's ironic about that. The founding fathers of America were grand philosophers, weren't they? Few Americans understand the philosophy they understood that was the foundation of our Constitution and Declaration of Independence. And that's a huge problem. I have said it before and will continue to say it. The only reason the Democrat Party is possible is because of how dumbed down Americans are regarding world philosophy. There is another point here. Religion, as we know it, was founded on philosophers and based on world philosophy. That's the dirty little secret. No institution can boast a propaganda like the Protestant Church and its 5 solas, particularly sola scriptura, or scripture alone. All right? What's that mean exactly? Not what almost every Christian thinks it means. And I will give Catholics some credit there. They are at least much more honest about that, aren't they? So the idea that we get is that, Martin Luther was searching the scriptures diligently, night and day, and at night under candlelight, and hark, came upon these verses in the Bible that sparked the Protestant Reformation. In fact, they point to, I think, Romans 5:17 in particular as sparking the Protestant Revolution. Nothing could be further from the truth. You don't have to look very far and study on your own very far to realize that Luther and Calvin both were looking at scriptures through the eyes of Plato and world philosophy. Issues of world philosophies are what sparked the Protestant Reformation. And if you look further, and if you're actually one of the few Christians out there that read the founding documents of the church, it's not hidden, okay? It's fairly conspicuous. If churchgoers knew a fraction of what they think they knew, that would be pretty impressive. But the fact of the matter follows. If you do not understand how Plato viewed man and reality, you don't have a clue about what is really going on in church. Now, let me repeat that. The fact is, if you do not understand how Plato viewed man and reality, you don't have a clue what's going on in church. Okay? And, I suffer people daily who lecture me about the scripture this and the scripture that and the, church tradition this, church tradition that. They're clueless. Okay? So, this year, my part in all of this is discuss the following question. Should America be defined as a Christian nation? And if not, then what is it? And is there any harm in America being defined as a Christian nation? That's my contribution under America and religion. Okay? I did an extensive radio show on this subject in 2015, and we'll be revising it for sessions this year, for my sessions this year. So I really want to go back to this extensive radio program I did in 2015 and revise it and update it and use that for my talks this year. So, if you read the introduction to our conference this year, the land of the free and home of the brave, is that how you would define America? The greatest nation to ever exist in human history? The greatest force for good in human history? Is that how we would define America? Obviously we would, alright? But why? Why would we define America that way? Okay? Because we're a Christian nation? Because we were founded on Christian principles? Is that why? What made or makes America different? And clearly, not everyone shares our belief that America is all these things. Some people, apparently a lot of people in our day and age, and this isn't anything new under the sun for America, think America is a very bad place for one reason or another. So the one thing that everybody probably would agree on, though, is America is different. And why is that? America is obviously very unique in world history. America ended two things as historical norm. This is a good way to define America. It ended two things as historical norm. Conquest as a normative behavior among nations, okay, and religious wars. That's the two things America ended as norms amongst all nations in the world. Now, I'm not saying that that doesn't take place at all in the world today, but you got to understand those two things, conquest and religious wars, dominated world history, okay, since the garden until America comes about. Why is that? Why is that? And if that's true, I'll go back and Dohse, I can actually pronounce his name, did very well to point this out in regard to the argument that America stole this land from the Indians. Okay? Well, if we stole it from the existing Indians at the time, they had stolen it from many, many, many other Indians over hundreds of years. Okay? Indian tribes in America, by and large, were of conquest mentality. It was a constant cycle of conquest going on. Okay? America put an end to that. Then why is America so controversial? Why do so few Americans know anything about America? And if America is such a great place to live, why do so many Americans hate it? Because they do not understand philosophy, all right? Because of their presuppositions about mankind. No, the Democrats have not lost their minds. They keep going back to the same failed playbook because of their presuppositions about humanity. And people keep following them because they share that same ideology. All right? So, really, I find myself continually going back to our very first conference. Right? Okay? John Emmel hit on two things in his, and again, we did a lot of work to document that conference. And I think every homeschool home in the United States of America ought to insert that conference information into their curriculum. Okay? In that conference, we have the basics that I find myself completely going back to time and time and time again. Now, John hit on 2 points, and I forget how to frame them. He pretty much repeats them every year at the beginning of all his talks, okay? But he asks the question, why do people engage in the same destructive behavior over and over and over again, though it yields the same results? You've heard the saying that, doing the same thing over and over and over again when it yields the same ill result is a good definition of insanity. But yet, we see that, don't we? Presently in our culture, we see the Democrat Party engaging in the exact same playbook that they engaged in 1972, and in that election year, and they went on to win one state in the whole electoral college with 17 electoral votes. Okay? McGovern got 17 electoral votes, Nixon got all the rest. And basically the dynamics of what was going on is presently going on with the message that, hey, vote us in and we'll stop the violence. It didn't work. So why would the Democrats be using that same playbook when it failed so miserably in 1972? It's an ideology that they embrace, they're sold on the ideology. The ideology must be right, and the ideology that they absolutely refuse to get away from is their presuppositions regarding mankind. They won't move from that view. Okay? And that's another thing that John said in the conference in 2012, that all reality, how people see reality, and all ideologies flow out of presuppositions concerning mankind. And of course that was anathema to me. You know why? Because I came from a Reformed background, right? And was a church pastor in Reformed chapters. That's a man-centered philosophy. Okay? All of reality is interpreted about presuppositions about God, not man. Okay? Well, the only problem there is God created man. Alright? So what do we see in man as far as what God created? And how does it form our beliefs? Okay? And John Calvin agrees with John Emmel in the very first sentence of the Calvin Institutes when Calvin says that all truth and all reality is determined by all truth regarding man and God. Okay? So all truth is interpreted between how man is defined and how God is defined. And all of the Calvin Institutes, all 1,100 pages, flow out of the basis of that one sentence. Okay, which is pretty amazing. Is America a Christian nation? Was it really founded on Judeo-Christianity? And if not, what are its real founding principles and why does it matter? This is obviously a timely conference and discussion for our day when globalism seeks to replace Americanism. Is America worth saving? And would the world be just as well off without it, or even better? Okay? And how is globalism related to the aforementioned presuppositions about humanity shared by those who hate America? Christian, the word, is one of those generic words that we kind of throw around, right? All right? We are going to stop here and ask why that is. Why do we just kind of are able to throw around these words like Christian and gospel and so on and so forth? And we need to look at that because it speaks hugely to the point at hand here. How can we have this conversation without a definitive understanding of what the word Christian means? The question is discussed on radio and other venues, that is, the question of, are we a Christian nation? America, that is. The question is discussed on radio and other venues comfortably while crossing every line between everything in the kitchen sink that calls itself Christian, and nobody blinks. How can this happen? Well, here is how. Because all stripes under the nomenclature of Christian define the word this way. All right, are you ready? Not secular. All right? So, the point that I'm about to make here, okay, and I might have to skip ahead in my transcript, because here's the point I'm going to make. This is my interesting observation. When you're listening to the Janet Medford show, and, Mike Huckabee on, Sean Hannity, in all these shows, okay? The definition of Christian is not secular, okay? So, it doesn't matter, and I'm going to go ahead and steal my own fire here and jump ahead and make the point, okay? In that context, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Jehovah's Witness, Mormons, Catholic, okay, name them all. It doesn't matter. When you're listening to that, you're going, preach it, Sean Hannity. America is a Christian nation. In God we trust on the, so what's that mean? It means not secular. Okay, not secular. Which is divisive in and of itself. But the point I go on to make, maybe later on in this talk, or maybe it's tomorrow morning, okay, is that if these people finally got their own way, okay, and if you believe America is a Christian nation, as the saying goes, hold my beer, or hold the fort, however you want to say it. We're going to qualify that, all right? That needs to be qualified. I'm going to go ahead and say, no, America isn't a Christian nation, okay? And we're going to explain why. And why this strict dichotomy between Christian and secular is very dangerous, okay? But the point I go on to make here, and I'm going to make, is if that argument gets ended and everybody agrees that yes, we're a Christian nation, what happens after that? What have we got? Okay? Well, some problems arise, because if everybody agrees we're a Christian nation, you can't be secular and patriotic. Okay, that's the first thing. Then the second thing is, what happens? Now, it's not good enough just to concede we're a Christian nation. Now what's the next argument? Okay? Which denomination is truly Christian, right? Well, we got rid of the not Christian, secular argument. We got rid of that argument. Now what's going to happen? Well, wait a minute here. We got all of these denominations trying to run the country. Which one is really biblical? Okay? And I'll give you a clue. Every religious war in medieval times boils down to that argument. Okay? So we're going to look at this. Now, where does that leave me in my transcript? Okay? Let me move along here. Alright, so while this subject is being discussed, all theological differences can be put away, because all the parties have one thing in common. They believe in God in one way or the other. For the time being, they are united against the greater evil, that is, secular, the big S, those who don't believe in God. Okay? And as we know, the godless have been out to destroy the godly since the beginning of time. It's really an us against them kind of thing. Yes, as we think, the primary nemesis of the church has been all of these secular people who don't believe in God. Okay, and why don't they believe in God? Well, because they don't go to church. All right? This is so not human history. Do this. Find one account in human history where a secular government persecuted religion. Okay? Well, your answer is probably going to be Marxism. But even if that's true, even if you could use Marxism as an example, Marxism is a parenthetical historical anomaly, and we're going to find out why that is. But let's look at that notion. Marxism is an equal opportunity persecutor when it gets right down to it. That is merely intolerant of different views on how to achieve its proposed utopian goals. I think it's fair to say, for the most part, Marxism doesn't care what you believe. It primarily believes whether or not you give them any trouble or stand in their way. I think John Emmel would probably say all Marxists care about, or socialists, is what your presuppositions about mankind are, or your belief about who man is. Okay? Those who die under its tyranny usually do so as a result of its policies, not a targeted persecution. Its targeted persecution is usually against dissenters. Even if you find fault with my assessment, remember Marxism is primarily a 19th and 20th century phenomenon. Okay? Did you ever think about why there's no Marxism before the 19th century? Did you ever think about that and why that happened? And by the way, secular governments in general are really a post-American Revolution phenomenon anyway, the whole idea of secular governments. Before that, church states were the norm. You got that? Before that, church states were the norm. And by church, which is a very handy word with a 5th century etymology, we mean organized religion. Organized church states were always the norm, by and large, before the American Revolution. And again, the whole secular government thing is kind of a post-American to earn the recognition of Christianity's primary nemesis. Okay? And again, I've got to point to our first conference, where Susan points out how Billy Graham's claim to fame in rise in power, for lack of a better way to put it, well, yeah, was his anti-communist stance, right? That was the big theme of his ministry. But communism hasn't been around nearly long enough to be recognized as Christianity's number one nemesis, or that is the church as well. Church is defined as a religious institution with an authority structure. So now we're going to define church in that way. By and large, all international violence in human history is predicated by religious intolerance. That's the vast majority of it. And what are we still on?
I restarted.
You already restarted it. Thank you. This is a violence that will not even tolerate those who keep their mouths shut and look the other way. Those who have no faith are always a threat to a state ruled by virtuous, invisible powers from above. Before church, it was the great religions and paganism. Okay? So before church comes along, and before the church state comes along, and we've got this term going on now, perpetual war or never-ending war. Before America comes along, we had never-ending wars, and they were all religious wars. Okay? There hasn't been a religious war in America since before the American Revolution. Okay, very few in the world as a whole. When they are, it's little small skirmishes in third world countries. All right, but before America, religion was the source of never-ending wars, non-stop, all throughout history, along with its conquest mentality, along with it. So, it all starts out, don't you want a government ruled by godly principles? Of course you do. Christian good, secular bad. Alright? Those who believe in God, good. Those who don't believe in God, bad. Well, you can't have people running the country who don't believe in God, right? Second step, once they get into power using that ploy, hark. Not all who claim God really believe in God. Then the secular boogeyman that never existed in the first place is now the pseudo-Christian. So it goes, like I mentioned, aforementioned, it goes from this, generic Christian, which means not secular. Then we get into the difference between true Christians and pseudo-Christianity. That's history, period. This is the way it always happens. Depending on what your presuppositions about humanity are, overcoming one division is just going to lead to the next. If America overcomes the secular nemesis, it would move on to religious infighting. Okay? Right now, there is only Republican-Democrat infighting. Just think, we could have infighting that included all the various and sundry denominations instead, if we were a Christian nation, and we would. Okay? And you disagree? In what time in history did that not happen? Right? And invariably, we would. Do you think we have division now? You haven't seen anything if the church ever got back in bed with the government. Now, the question is not simply who believes in God or not, but who has the best theology. As it is, the church itself doesn't even agree. Have you been on any blogs lately? Okay? I mean, they're even debating what the gospel is. Okay? Now, not only that, spiritual rule is always much more subjective than practical rule. Okay? During Hitler's reign, a common mantra was the bearing of those who had no faith. Okay? In the words of Rudolf Hess, and I quote, he said, "Do not seek Adolf Hitler with your mind. You will find him through the strength of your hearts." Robert Ley, the internal education minister for Rudolf Hitler, stated the following in his famous speech, "Fate, I believe. Understanding sometimes is not enough to explain something. Only faith is sufficient." All right? So when you start getting into religious rule, right away you get away from the objective into the subjective. Okay? And if you don't do what we think we should do, okay, you don't have faith. You're an unbeliever. Okay? At no time in world history has religious government been shown to be a good idea or turned out well. Okay? Was America founded on belief in God? Was belief in God the principle in which the nation was supposed to function? After all, don't we have money with "In God We Trust" printed on it? The question isn't whether or not some of the founders believed in God and were good Christians. The question is whether or not they believed America should be a theocracy. This is the question I'm getting at here. Okay? Did they see a reality in which common practical sense should rule rather than subjective religiosity? And did they think God agreed with them? All right? Hey, just maybe God doesn't agree with church running the show. Okay? Well, what we're going to see is Lincoln, all these guys, especially the founding fathers, thought it was a bad idea for church to be running the government and thought very much that God agreed with them totally. You can just hear people screaming, running away now with hands over their ears. But this is the focus of where I'm going with my talk. So I'm going to dissect this idea. Okay? No. America was not founded on a Godward epistemology meant to dictate the function of government. The founders of the American Constitution were a mishmash of Christians and philosophers with varying beliefs about God and reality. Belief in God was not, I repeat, not the least common denominator that drove their agenda. Belief in God was not the horse that pulled the wagon. The horse that pulled the wagon was the competence of man, the freedom of man, and the fact that these were self-evident. In other words, as far as running the world and governments, the founding fathers of Americanism believed that the right kind of knowledge to do that, and the right kind of knowledge about man, and the right presuppositions about man were intuitive. Okay? Let's read from the opening statement of the Declaration of Independence. It reads as follows. Okay? When in course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. I'm glad these guys weren't like college professors, let's just put it that way. That would have been a tough class. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are empowered by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, okay, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This was a radical idea in human history. Okay, this is the American idea. That whenever any form of government became destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem likely to affect their safety and happiness. And this is what is important about the Second Amendment, because according to the American Constitution, if tyranny takes over and starts throwing its weight around, should we pick up arms and take care of business? Yeah, okay. And that would be a hot mess. But anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked with that. But that is the American Constitution. Primarily, the framers of the American Constitution were made up of two kinds of men. Those who believed man is competent and free because God had made him that way. Now listen to this point here, okay? So I'm going to back up. Primarily, the framers of the American Constitution were made up of two kinds of men. Those who believed man is competent and free because God made him that way. And men who believed mankind was competent and free because that fact is self-evident, whether there is a God or not. Notice the very wording of the Declaration of Independence. So there were two kinds of people, okay, putting this puppy together. Yeah, man's competent and able to self-rule. That's how God created him, okay? And then there are those that believe the exact same thing, but not because God created man that way, just because that's the way man is. And it's self-evident. Okay? So you see how, whether they were religious or not, and Thomas Jefferson wasn't particularly religious, by the way, okay, they had this core value in presuppositions regarding mankind. God made man free and endowed him with the right to pursue happiness. Competence, of course, is the center. Notice also that a, quote, decent respect to the opinions of mankind is required, and the government is for one purpose and one purpose only: to preserve the right of man to pursue life and happiness. Okay? America is a government by the people and for the people because of God's order of things, not his dictates. Okay? The horse that pulled the wagon was man's self-ownership, competence, and endowed right to pursue happiness. The Declaration of Independence is not because God said so. It is because of what is self-evident and of, quote, facts submitted to a candid world. I love that. Okay? Facts submitted to a candid world. That also from the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is first and foremost a man-centered document because of how the framers perceived God's orders of things. And so that I'm not misunderstood, I'm going to repeat that. The Declaration of Independence is first and foremost a man-centered document because how the framers perceived God's order of things, i.e., God created mankind as competent beings who can self-govern. Chaos will not ensue, but rather prosperity. Okay? By the way, that idea is completely anathema to anything church, whether Protestant or Catholic, but much more on that later. So we're going to read a little bit further from the document. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Okay? Nor have we wanted, now you know there's a big discussion going on in our day of what a tyrant is and what constitutes tyranny, right? Alright? Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them that of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would invariably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice, and this word is an interesting word, consanguinity. Something like that. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, and peace friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress, assembled appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. That we are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, include peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives and fortunes and our sacred honor. Now notice that they declare a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence. Alright? That's the point of reading a lot of that and this. They call on God for His help, but if you back up through the statement, and this is more wording to the kind of reiterate this, what is their authority?